A lot of reaction to this pouring in from Texas and beyond as hundreds march in protest in the suburb north of Dallas after video shows a police officer pinning a teenage girl to the ground and then drawing his gun. See this here on the right-hand side of your screen on two other teens. And then you see the other two police officers who kind of rush in to that situation. And then the rest of it unfolds with the girl. Watch. Witnesses to that scene, including the man who shot this video, are disagreeing over what they saw. Some say the police targeted the teens by race. Others say that the video shows only part of the story.
I thought it was out of line compared to the other officers. The other officers acted very professional. I was like one of the few Caucasian people at the party, so I think it might have had something to do with racism.
They didn't see the kids running all over the place, not complying with the officers. They didn't see them cussing to the police officers, becoming unruly to them.
David Webb is the host of the David Webb Radio Show, a columnist at The Hill and Fox News contributor. Marjorie Clifton is a former Obama campaign consultant and principal of Clifton Consulting. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
So David, you've talked to some people in the area. You used to live not far from there. What are they saying?
This was an out-of-control crowd. And by the way, the young
out of control specifically.
Out of control, jumping fences, right. Damage to private property. There's a report of a stolen truck. There was a DJ who was tweeting out after hours, "Come to this party, pay $15 a person." This was a mob scene. This is not a large, unruly crowd. This is a mob crowd.
We're hearing 70, maybe 100 kids.
Actually, the number's probably closer to 130 from my looking into the story. But there's an issue here, and even in the video you just showed, you see the two police officers take off after someone. If you interfere with a police officer when he's doing his job, whether you like it or not, you suddenly change the dynamic for that officer. They should question why he pulled his gun, but we don't see what happened before that. However, residents in the area also report that these kids were completely out of control.
I get it. It seems like we know that it was an out-of-control party went awry. There's plenty of neighborhoods across this country that have had police show up at a party and say, we got to break this up. This is a bad situation. Marjorie, what's your take?
Well, I think the question is about race and whether this was something that was indicative of race. Pool parties get out of control all over the country, as you said. These kinds of things happen, especially with young people. But what was happening at that pool party, as reported by Texas Monthly, was beforehand you had white patrons at the pool shouting at black patrons, "Enjoy your time behind bars, go back to your Section 8 housing." Those are racially charged things that were being said. Now, what was happening on the scene, I agree. It does not necessarily reflect the entire scene of what was happening. We've got one moment in time. I don't think anyone argues that the police force that was used was inappropriate. The response was inappropriate given the amount of information they had when they got on scene. But I also see that there are white people standing, in the same situation.
I don't see this as a racial issue at all.
I don't know how you get race necessarily out of even the phrase.
Well, we don't know. I mean, it may be true that people were saying what Marjorie's saying, and if that is true,
but it doesn't. But Martha, it doesn't necessarily connote race to say go back to Section 8 housing. The problem we have here is you have a majority black crowd, which means if the majority of people are being unruly, most of them are black who are being unruly. Doesn't mean the police officers. There was only one officer on the scene initially, 2 security guards, and that's when more officers, I think it's 10 or 11 other officers showed up. So they're looking at the crowd as a whole. They're not picking out initially, let's go after that black person or that white person.
Here's the problem that I see with this, okay? Because if this was just a party that got out of control and the police came and broke it up, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it today. The reason we're sitting here talking about it is because of what happens between the police officer and the girl when he slams the girl onto the ground. That is why we're here, okay? Right. Now, we look at this video again, and you see that 2 boys run, and, one former police officer says you can kind of see one of these boys reach behind his back. So perhaps this officer, and you watch him come in right, or this may be actually later in the video.
It's a little bit later.
You watch him come in a little bit later, and you'll see that one boy reaches behind his back. That may have been what prompted this officer to pull out his gun. Then what you see is 2 other police officers swiftly come to either side of that police officer, perhaps to say, this kid is fine.
And then take off running after the other 2 youths. By the way,
but there's no reason for this, David. There's no reason for pinning the girl on the ground whatsoever.
No,
do you agree?
I agree that needs to be looked into. However, there was also another fight and other fights going going on. So these cops were dealing not with this one girl, but they were dealing with a dynamic
so this is the boy,
situation.
and right before that, he reaches behind his back and he starts to run. Then you see the other two police officers come in, and those guys
but
take
then in
off.
the other parts of the video, you also see them taking black young men, pushing them on the ground, arresting them, saying that they need to stay put.
Does that mean race?
Why wouldn't it when you have white people with it?
Prove to me that taking someone and putting them down because the color of their skin connotes and equates to racism automatically.
Because you have a large population of people out there, but I think there's a different issue at hand. No, because according to Pew,
tell me how it makes it race when there's a majority black crowd and there are police officers involved. There's an entirely unreal environment. There's a fight between a woman, black and white. There are other fights going on, and that is automatically race.
Because you're in a neighborhood with 64% white people and 31% of black people actually trust the police, as to 71%.
I think if these kids had all been white, and the police officers would have done the exact same thing to them. But I think that what happens in the moment that we just saw will be investigated. We know
and
this officer has been suspended because it's their job to de-escalate the situation, not to escalate.
Martha, I have been in unruly crowds, and Marjorie, with all due respect, I have spent 2 decades going into unruly crowds and riots, whether it's Ferguson, Raleigh, North Carolina, other areas.
All racially charged.
And when you're in that,
all racially charged.
I've been in white crowds too, and when you get into that environment, it is not that easy. It's great to sit here and pundit about it, but maybe you ought to live it a little bit and understand what police officers and residents deal with.
Marjorie and David, thank you very much, guys. Good to have you.
Thank you, Martha.
All right.